My name is Jesse Fergali, host of Working Capital, the real estate podcast. My guest today is Sheila Botting. I'm not going to mess up this title, so I'll just read it here. Principal and President, America's Professional Services. That includes consulting and advisory as well as project management. Sheila has had senior roles at the likes of Cushman & Wakefield, and most recently, she was senior partner and Canadian real estate leader with Deloitte LLP. We talked about the office, workplace strategy, the office of the future, is office dead? All things real estate with a laser focus on the office sector. If you're at all interested in what I just talked about there, I think you'll get a lot out of this conversation. So without further ado, enjoy the show. Sheila, how you doing today?
I'm great, Jesse. How are you doing?
Doing fantastic. So the conversation today, I thought it was topical because I think the last time we spoke was the beginning of 2021, and so much has changed in the office and commercial real estate market in general. And I thought it would be great to have you back on to discuss those aspects and how they have changed. And I know that you have, made these type of discussions and presentations with various outlets, Wall Street Journal, Harvard Business Review. So I thought you could do the same for us here.
Oh, terrific. Thanks so much. So it's all about return to office. You can tell my background. I have returned to the office today and, 2 to 3 days a week, along with everybody else across North America and around the globe. And I think that for all of us, it's sorting through how do we deal with return to office? What does it look like? What are the key pieces? How do we make it work for our businesses, for us personally? How do we embrace this so that it's, dynamic for our people and way forward? What we've learned from all of this is it's all changed. It's not going back, whatever back was. We're not in the 9-to-5 work environment that we once were. Now it's all about flexibility. It's about building our ecosystem. It's about navigating what it is that we need to do and how we do it. It's understanding, different roles that people have and making sure that they've got the right tools, technology, and physical spaces in order to deliver. I thought what I would do today in talking is I know you know about this, but to share with all of your audience, something called the Vitality Index that Avison Young uses across North America, and in fact, the globe. What we do is we measure cell phone data usage in downtown for 26 North American cities. So what I thought I'd do is first level set on where are we today, in September 2022, where have we come from March 2020, and what does that return to office look like? So I am going to share my screen with you.
And for those listening, we'll upload this as well as a video, so you can follow along with the video and graphics here.
So Jesse, Avison Young has something called the Vitality Index, and what we do is we measure the return to downtown. So I'm showing this on the screen. Really what we're doing from March 2nd of 2020 through to, in this most recent example, is August 29th, 2022, we measure return to downtown. So we've got mobility data from various locations, typically 8 to 12 locations downtown in the major North American cities, in fact, 26 North American cities, and we see where it is relative to before the pandemic. So you can see on the list, we've got the greens are Canada, the blues are the United States. So at the top of our list, in Canada, Edmonton, which is in northern Alberta, is down 43.8% from before the pandemic started on March 2nd, 2020. That means that the foot traffic in downtown Edmonton is still down 44% on one end of the spectrum, and that's the best city in North America. Going all the way to the other extreme, again, another Canadian city, Ottawa, is down 80% from when the pandemic started. So you think about some of the larger US cities, Boston is down 43.8%, New York is still down 50%, Austin down 52%, Chicago down almost 56%, East Bay, Oakland down 56, San Francisco down 57.5%, Calgary down 58, Montreal down 59, and so on across the board. Washington down almost 63%. So when you start looking at the data, you realize that as much as people talk about return to office, we have not returned to office. You know, knock your socks off if somebody says things are going back to normal. What this is largely saying is that our entire world is not returned. The chart on the right here really shows what that looks like across the board. And it shows that, in fact, we have not returned to normal. And it looks like, in my opinion, it's not returning to whatever we define as normal anytime soon. At the same time, we can also look at various industry sectors. So across this bit, if you were to look at, say, the technology industry, perhaps, faring worse off than finance or some of the other sectors. So absolutely fascinating when you start peeling away the layers of the onion. So I wanted to start with this whole perspective in terms of what does return look like? Who is returning? How does it all play out? And the message across the board is right across North America, the 26 cities that we're looking at best, we're down, over 43% from before the pandemic. Now, so then the next natural question is, what does that mean for employees and occupiers, the people that lease space in various markets? That's one whole bundle. Another whole bundle would be the investors and asset managers. What do we do to get people to come downtown? And a third part would be all of the businesses and the governments that are looking at, the Downtown Business Association that thrive on a healthy return to office. And so, because of course the vibrancy of our downtowns are very core to the fabric of our North American economy. What does that look like? So we can, dive into each one of those segments to understand how to unpack it and what are the various components so that we can think about the future and think about how do we manage our businesses, how do we manage our assets, and how do we manage our downtowns.
When it comes to the Vitality Index, Sheila, in terms of the actual use of the cell phone data, I know that, working with Avison Young, we talk about this a lot, but for those that kind of want to understand the cell phone data in a downtown area, it's kind of used as a proxy for a full office building. Do I have that right in terms of how that data is used or what it's used to represent?
Yeah. So what we'll do is we'll tag geo spaces in downtowns of various cities, 8 to 12 different locations, and we'll measure the pings on the cell phone data in those locations. So pick a downtown financial core office building or a downtown transit hub. In some cases, our clients have us look at hotels and or even life sciences buildings out in the suburbs. So we can really geofence any type of location. For this particular application, it's been the downtowns of these North American cities that we update, once every 2 weeks. At the beginning, we were doing it every week, saying everybody thought year one, hey, we're going back. Well, it's not happening anytime soon. And so what the data shows us is it not yet returned to downtown.
Yeah.
So what does that mean? So from the occupier perspective, the company or the government organization or the business that's thinking about their space, they think, how much space do I need? If it's sitting there empty, pick your North American city, because even before the pandemic, space was empty 50% of the time. So before the pandemic, when we did utilization studies, bums and seats analysis across North American cities, the average seat was empty 50% of the time. And so that didn't matter if you were in some remote location in the middle of nowhere or downtown New York or Toronto. The same thing would be held true. And that's because the way we work has changed. We're no longer processing paper from the left to the right of our desk. Rather, we're engaging, collaborating, doing things in many different ways. And so because of that, even before the pandemic, people were rethinking how they would devise their workspace. The pandemic has simply accelerated that overall trend and is forcing us to consider what is the role of the office. what is it we want to be? Are we going to create rows and rows of cube farms? Or are we going to create a downtown campus or a downtown lab or a downtown engagement experience, a hospitality experience for our people? And that's really what the pivot is toward, is creating these immersive experiences for our people so that when they do get together, it's easy for them to collaborate, to engage, and to solve problems together. It's not about processing paper from the left to the right of your desk. Although you could say it's about being on Zoom or Teams, but nonetheless, it's not about, the old ways of working. And so the value proposition that companies are making for their people is where the pivot is. So on one side of the spectrum, we're saying we can get rid of a chunk of our individual workspaces because it becomes about collaboration and teaming. People like me, I can, do most of my heads down work when I'm sitting quietly on my own away from everybody, as opposed to out in a, bullpen kind of environment. So you recalibrate how you work. You still give people choice. So if you need to go to a bullpen or you need to go to the office, there's still places to go, but the rotation is toward collaborative spaces. And so with that pivot on space, suddenly you need less space. So first generation in these types of evolutions typically involve anywhere from a 20 to 30% reduction in space, assuming you've got the same employee population. Second generation could be as much as 50% reduction in space. We've had clients reducing their space by 50% through this whole pandemic. And they're saying, we're quite fine having people work from home 1, 2, 3 days a week. That's quite fine for us. And so the question becomes, how do you entice your people to come back to the office? Because in the war for talent, it's all about providing people flexibility to make choices with how and where they want to work, but equally create an incredible environment that they want to come back downtown and they want to engage with their colleagues and employees to, get their projects and or work completed. So that's literally what the entire market is looking for today, at least the folks that we're dealing with across all sectors.
Sheila, I have a question on the so on the work that you were doing. You mentioned the utilization studies you've done in the past, and as we know, this predated the pandemic. A lot of companies they operate at 50, 60, 70%, depending on the industry, the company and location. But the studies that you did where you had companies actually go and reduce space, is that type of reduction the same, the philosophy the same as it would be now for reducing space based on low utilization, as opposed to reducing space based on what we've learned of how we can work differently in the last 12 months? Or are they separate kind of exercises?
I would say all of the above. Literally, it's a bit of everything. So I think before the pandemic, there were those early adopters. I would suggest that it started originally out of Australia with many of the banks there that went to hot desking unassigned seating models. And then, the accounting big consulting firms went to that model as many of their people were out in clients' offices. And now it's moved on to financial institutions and public sector organizations. GSA out of Washington embraced it. Government of Canada has embraced this. City of Toronto, Province of Ontario. So this is literally wideswept across the markets. And that started before the pandemic. All of that was before the pandemic. And now what I see happening is that's simply accelerating across all sectors. Now, the real question is how much or how little, and what is the right fit? So what might be the right fit, for example, a law firm, which is very paper intensive, to a consulting firm or a financial institution? Very different solutions depending on the industry sector, and more importantly, the type of work that the individual employee and or teams would do. So that's really what we're navigating right now, making sure that the specific solutions for that client group and that industry sector, absolutely apply.
Got it. So that was so with the workplace, we've talked about the occupier piece here, and there are a couple other components.
So, the other components on the occupier, it's about the war for talent. It's about making the right kind of space for your people and what resonates across the different generations. And so it's not one size fits all by any stretch of the imagination. You really have to think about the different populations, whether it's the veterans, the boomers, millennials, Gen X, Gen Z, what does that entire group need? So that's a generational distinction. Then you have the whole style of working. So if I'm, for example, if I'm a loud, boisterous person, I need to be around a lot of people, I'll have one way that I like to work, versus if I'm a quiet individual that needs to have walls around me to work, that's a completely different style. And so there's a whole neuroscience attached to understanding those different work styles and then designing appropriate workspaces. And so I think that particular topic has been hyper influenced through the pandemic, because if I'm a quiet person working home from my home office and it's quiet, I like that, right? I like that. Versus if I'm a gregarious, outgoing person, you stick me in a quiet place at home, I'm going out of my mind. And so trying to understand those differences become everything. So that's one whole science that's evolving relative to different work styles. So in some organizations, pick an engineering firm or law firms where you have many different types of personalities, that has one evolution, versus our firm, which is brokerage, where everybody's a lot more gregarious. So again, very different fits in the marketplace. Understanding that and then quantifying it. The other big question in the design lies around assigned seating versus unassigned seating. So if you have a population that's hybrid and you're saying, oh, we should have them into work 2, 3, maybe 4 days a week. And oh, by the way, while they're in, they're collaborating with others, they're going out to Starbucks, they're meeting in different sessions, then you don't necessarily need assigned seating for those people. They can move around based on their schedules for the day. So if I come in the morning, I need to do some emails versus collaborate with colleagues on projects versus go to meetings to talk about various topics. I don't need my assigned seat through the entire day. And that's where the 50% vacancy occurred before the pandemic. So again, that's a whole other iteration about the unassigned seating. In order to be successful, you need tremendous change management programs. So you could argue the entire world is going through the largest change management program right now, because think about you're sitting in your remote office right now and you're saying, I'm quite happy here. Would I do this and give up assigned seating downtown and only come downtown when I need to? Like any day of the week, because I have flexibility. I can go to my vacation property to work on Fridays if I want to, or whatever the case may be. So that flexibility becomes really crucial in the war for talent. Other key components come, I've talked about design, very flexible designs, very flexible use of space, hot desking, unassigned seating. Amenities are huge, both within the physical space, over rotation on hospitality, food, coffee. The quality of coffee in your space becomes everything. Putting apples out for wellness. For the property owners, making sure that you've got an abundance of services and amenities for the employees so that it helps their occupier in the war for talent. And then, of course, ESG, environmental, social, and governance considerations, making sure that those are all addressed, whether it's well certified or LEED certified, those become other key anchors for the space.
So when you move on to that piece there where you have investors or asset managers, I mean, it's the other side of the same coin. How are you? What is the recommendation, or what do you see changing in that side of our world, and what they're thinking about that might be different than the occupier side?
So it's about taking a sterile office building, right? Think about the old prestigious, even think of, Suits, the great TV show, right? And you think about these wonderful, beautiful marble sterile office buildings. So then you say, how do you take that and inject a hospitality or a hotel-like personality to that space? Of course, we can do that any day of the week. Throw a coffee shop in the lobby, animate it with retail, create events, pizza days, and suddenly you take your lobbies and your big open spaces and you activate them so that they're really intriguing for people to be in, whether they're inside the lobby walls or outside in the green spaces around the office building. So that's one massive opportunity. So you're managing the asset, but you're also activating the asset at the same time. Some other opportunities lie around, bicycle storage in the basement, putting incredible retail in, whether it's a coffee store, whether it's a fitness center, whether it's a daycare, and many other retail amenities in the space. Also thinking about, common stairwells right now, base building stairwells that are concrete, not terribly nice in many buildings. Well, what would happen if you painted them, animated them, and did some exercise kind of routine running up and down staircases? So it's about taking a core asset and doing really cool things with it to make people want to be there. It's about surprise and delight. And again, so it's turning your asset on its heels to operate more like a hotel or a hospitality opportunity.
Now, this plays into other roles in real estate, transit being one of them. What we've seen with tenants that we've worked with is that really good, inviting office space that's well located has fared, not surprisingly, much better than other asset class on different transit routes that might not be in the path of progression or just connectivity. What are you seeing on the transit front? Is that a theme that's persisting through the pandemic and to now?
No, absolutely. So it's funny, Northwestern University asked me to be involved in their expert panel to talk about workplace because everybody's so free, specifically on the transportation front, because everybody is so excited about how workplace is influencing the return to downtown, transit. Are we using subways and commuter trains? What does that look like? Before the pandemic, there were gazillions of dollars put into infrastructure investment. Now suddenly, if people aren't using them to the same extent, so you could probably take the vitality index and apply that to a situation. So there's a very real example. One of the interesting trends that we found through the vitality index in New York, we actually monitored it on hour by hour basis. And we found that it was less busy during the office workday, more busy on nights and weekends. So everybody was using transit to go to the theater, to go to restaurants downtown or weekend events. So the tourism component is alive and well is what we're learning. It's the office part that is really the challenge. And so on the transit front, I think that's just a sense of time and return and population growth. And I think it will take a while for it to return if you're looking at the vitality index as one of the indicators.
So on the office end, we were talking a little bit before the show here, and industrial, multi-res, real estate, you always say is a very local thing, but you could almost make some pretty sweeping claims of how well multifamily industrial has done over the last 2 years. Office has been that question mark. And I was speaking to the CIO of CrowdStreet, Ian Formigli, last week, and we were talking about this. He called it the tenant inducement complex, in that we've gotten so large in the amounts of tenant allowance, tenants inducements for build outs. And it seems like we're ripping down stuff that we just put in 5 years ago, where there's this discussion of somehow commoditizing office space in the way that we haven't seen it in the office sector, so that it's more of a plug and play. It's not, every 3 years or 5 years that you're ripping out hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of build out. What's your take on that? I'd love to get your thoughts.
So yes, of course, because before the pandemic, people were creating cube farms. They were creating rows and rows and rows of or warehouses of workers. And that's not what we need. We didn't need it then. We certainly don't need it now. And so now, if you were to, if you watch any of the shows on WeWork and that whole story, but that's the animated environment that everybody wants. So yes, you can create that. And so we of course have a whole flex office practice that thinks about that space where, as a tenant, I can go lease that kind of space and I don't have to worry about the leasehold improvements. I can just move into it, right? And so if you're a mid-sized tenant, that becomes a really viable solution for you, because you can scale up or scale down based on whatever your requirements are. And you don't need to worry about building space out and all the rest of it. If you're a larger occupier, whether it's a bank or a law firm or a consulting firm, that is your brand, right? Your brand is your space. And so you want to put your colors and image and reputation around all of that. So again, it depends on what you need. But the movement toward engaged creative spaces absolutely is here to stay.
So
gone are the cube farms.
It's funny you mentioned WeWork, because it was in that discussion speaking about Adam Newman's new venture with Flow, and I think it was $350 million raised for that, and trying to take that to a multifamily, do that the same thing, close to the same thing that was done for WeWork, but for residential or multi-residential. So for this whole aspect of workplace strategy, coming back to work is, when are we going back to quotations normal? It seems like those are just, terms that people have thrown around, that when we're really looking at office and the future of workplace, it's not going to be an either or. It sounds like it's going to be a hybrid, no pun intended there. But would love to get your thoughts if you had your crystal ball out here and we talk about these time frames, because you made a great point where we were checking the vitality index every week because, okay, next week the pandemic's over, next week it's over. But if looking kind of soberly at what you're seeing in the marketplace in terms of workplace environment, return to office, what do you tell people or clients when they're asking you, what is your forecast for the next year, 2 years, or longer, if that is what you think it's going to take?
So if today, 2.5 years into the pandemic, we're down 50 to 55% on average across North America, and oh, by the way, that's up from the 70 to 75% average. It's taken 2.5 years. In another 2.5 years, we'll be at the 30 to 40% range on average. It will take a while for people to fully acclimatize to returning to downtown. I've learned that I can actually get more work done in my home office. You and I can have this call and we're very effective at it. And so when I come downtown, it's a whole other way of working. And so for the individual, it's about balancing all of those things off. And so when you have millions of individuals making those choices, I think it's going to take a while to return. So then the next question becomes, well, is the office dead? That's the obvious question everybody's asking. And the answer to that is absolutely not. We're social people. We want to be with our colleagues. Jesse, I love seeing you in the office. Like, that's a really important thing. We need to have that connection. So the office is not dead, but it does have to be redefined. And so these giant towers that we have to be reimagined for the future so that they become relevant for the next wave of working, because that relevance and the value proposition of the office is incredibly powerful. So you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Think about it, 10 years ago, or something like that, industrial wasn't very exciting. Now suddenly it's very exciting. And so this too shall pass, and the office assets too shall become very relevant all over again, because the downtowns in our North American cities are vibrant centers of creativity and innovation, and we need to, preserve and protect that.
And when it comes to that search for talent, there's been different studies of whether it's 2 or 3 weeks of commute time, what that equates to in actual time of the year, in the year, in terms of what employers will have to trade, or what needs to happen between employers and employees if they do go with a hybrid model. So if, like Comcast and Apple just announced that, I don't know if it was mandated, but that they're going to go with a 3-day work week as of now. What do you see that as? Though, obviously it's dependent on the employer, the specific employers, but how do you see that negotiation taking place, where some companies do want to mandate some form of presence in the office, maybe not at a full-time basis, but they want to have something there? How do you see these discussions, or how have you seen these discussions play out?
So I think, again, it goes back to depends on the company, depends on the culture, depends. So hybrid is here to stay. So then the question becomes, for each company, how do they navigate that hybrid work style? And so mandates saying you've got to come back 5 days a week are never going to work. That's never going to be, in my view, a viable option. I think the opportunity, saying flex work schedules, flexible opportunities, I think that will be the theme overall, not thou shalt do this, because it's been proven that employees, 85% of employees returning to the workplace want flexible work hours. And if you don't offer that as an employer, they're voting with their feet and going somewhere else. So that becomes table stakes. So then you say, okay, got hybrid, how am I going to manage that? How am I going to mitigate that? Typically what happens is you'll make some kind of a corporate statement, says we'd love to have people to come back 2 to 4 days a week, whatever that is. And then each manager, each team then provides governance for that team based on the type of work that they do and based on their outputs and or their deliverables. That's typically the way this plays out. What that all means is reduced footprint opportunity for those of us in the real estate community.
Well, Sheila, it's always a wealth of knowledge every time we have a discussion. If there isn't anything else that you want to add here, I think we could talk for another hour here on this stuff. If there's nothing else, I thought we would kind of leave it here with where individuals, whether in the commercial real estate space or just, investors, people that are interested in these topics when it comes to workplace strategy, what typical resources do you point people to, when we're having this discussion, aside from obviously going out to Avison Young? We have a number of reports that you can get there.
So I'm addicted to all of the reports. So I think starting with management consulting firms who deal with human resources, human capital, and look at those broad trends, because what we're speaking about are those management consulting human resources trends that we then try to articulate and transition into the real estate world. So I always start there. So whether it's McKinsey, Deloitte, PwC, BCG, or whoever, they all have really highly valuable commentary regarding those big trends. The other part of this is looking at the large enterprises, understanding what their policy statements are. We're starting to track all that across North America so we could share what various financial institutions, life sciences company, professional services firms are doing within their space. So understanding that, I think, is really important. And then making your own decisions. That's really for an occupier piece. For the investors, never before have you had to be so creative. I'm a huge proponent of workshops, and by workshops, I mean engaging your key stakeholders, whether they're occupiers, employees, or whoever, and reimagining the office building. What could it look like? Everybody loves to play Monopoly, so let's play Monopoly with the office building and figure out what the right fit is for your building overall.
My returning guest today has been Sheila Botting. Sheila, thanks for being part of Working Capital.
Thanks, Jesse, for the opportunity. Really love it again.